Coming at you live with this cast over, it's iSarCasm taking on Neblime. Now, I bopped iSarCasm in my own match against him on this very map, Victory Square. Is Neblime going to do the same thing? Does he have what it takes to defeat this man who likes to go Solarians? Well, let's find out. Going to be starting off with a cross positions situation with Neblime, the Darkspring Green Terran in the top left, going up against iSarCasm, the yellow Protoss in the bottom right. Now, iSarCasm, going by Igor on the Discord server, is actually quite, I would say, notorious at this point for being relatively, I would say, like, he's at the very least, he's minimum a class 2 in terms of skill level, but he could probably challenge somebody like Neblime, somebody like even Mystery Meat, Hamster, etc. He seems like he's got what it takes. So the question is, can he leverage some of that? And yeah, I feel like this will be a good match as a result. Neblime submitted these replays. These were played on the tournament patch for Ascension 6, so even though that tournament is out, we are still in a spot where we're all good. And he's actually asking whether or not Neblime has played or is playing or whatever. At this point, it looks like he's practicing up for his fight against Mystery Meat in the lower final, the lower bracket there. So that's going to be quite interesting to see what ends up happening. Maybe we'll recognize some of his stats, because if you guys don't know, Neblime went for this really ridiculous, like, Fulcrum-infused playstyle. He decided to finally build Cyclops. He thought they were really epic, and I agree with him. Unfortunately, it didn't end up cutting the cheese against Mystery Meat, and that's not because Mystery Meat cheesed, but it didn't end up happening. He didn't build enough Cyclops, is my estimation, and it looks like our players are going to cross paths over here. Neblime Scout a little bit later. Not going to be Nexus first cross spawn, so anybody who's really, really quite terrified of that happening to them as a Terran player, they can breathe a sigh of relief. iSarCasm is not convinced you can do that. Not yet, anyway. It'll be a gateway. A little bit awkward Sim City over here. I'm interested in how this is going to change up. Like, we know Neblime likes his drop play, so in this context, coming in here, I like my drop play too, so he should be somewhat steeled against that, right? But regardless of whether or not he's prepared, it feels like, okay, we got a Dracoden coming. Again, this is the old Dracoden. Second gateway coming before the expansion, so... Oh, he actually cancels that. It looks like he decides against it. Maybe he wants to... since it's cross-spawn, maybe he feels like he can actually take a macro first. This is interesting decision-making here. And shout out to Neblime for trying to make sure that everybody he plays with signs up for the 7th Ascension tournament, the Gauntlet stage, the qualifier. It's going to be quite interesting there. And we do indeed have the Dracoden. It, for some reason, popped out over on the bottom, despite the rally point being up here. I suspect it's because it couldn't quite, like, fit at that angle, and it's just like, fuck it, go down. But who knows? This game is somewhat enigmatic. We do have a Ministry starting at that 11 o'clock position for Neblime, the back base. Not expecting air from his opponent. In fact, that's something that you can kind of benefit from, is if Protoss go air in the early game, they're pretty vulnerable as on the ground, because it costs so many resources to get sturdy air, or it's vassals, in which case you can kind of riposte it relatively easily, unless they get to a really high number, which, you can scout and kind of prepare yourself for. So, in that situation, this map seems like it's totally fine to go take this back base. There's no ground path, you have to drop, or you have to go for, again, air units to harass it. And so this Mason is not going to really get much of a scout off. It won't even confirm that there's a Nexus coming. But I feel like somebody like Neblime, he's more than happy to play a handshake macro game. So I don't suspect that this is going to be something that perturbs him too badly. Now we do have 4 Mavericks in this anchor. Stockade changing places so that it can add a Vestry to it. And we do have a Fulcrum coming as well. So we might see Goliath Cleric. That's kind of fallen out of favor despite the Goliaths receiving numerous anti-ground buffs over the last couple of tournaments. One of the things that I think you'll notice out of Goliaths is that they do obviously delay your tech a little bit, but when you get a decent number of them, if you can sustain them using something like, Vestries, for example, to pump out Clerics, Shamans, that sort of thing, you get those healing units out there. Clerics are the new medic, for those who don't know, and obviously Clerics themselves no longer have energy, so you just end up being able to sustain healing in that sense. And you can kind of think of them as like the more sustained for a single target, which is why they're so good with Goliaths, whereas Shamans are more about spreading the healing around in a wider area, but they have less sustained like single target healing than a single Cleric would. So that's despite the fact that obviously the Shaman is also more expensive, and currently can repair air units as well, which is something that I say, like I said, currently, I'm not sure if that will continue, because you can obviously stack like an infinite number of air units on top of a single Shaman, and then it's kind of like, what's the point of it having a range in that sense? It's kind of meaningless. So from a game design standpoint, air stacking is just a bit goofy, but doesn't seem like something that we can rectify anytime soon. One thing we did rectify is the new Drakadin model. The old one was, you can tell, it's quite dumb. Doesn't even feel like a real unit, honestly. It's like some weird impressionist art piece. Now, the bases are coming online for both of our players, and we do actually have a fast embassy for witnesses. It looks like, at this point, iSarCasm is having his fun thinking about how to respond to his opponent, and assuming that he's not really going to be put up against too much here. It's going to be Cleric Matador initially, and I really like Matadors. I also think that, they dish out a lot of damage. The big problem is like getting them on top of things like Drakadins, particularly if they're on a cliff, particularly if they're dancing like this. And I feel like that is actually going to be pretty difficult for something like the Matadors to contend with in that sense. However, if you can sustain it, there's another Mason corpse there, implying that indeed there was indeed a scout. I mean, neblime builds so many Masons that he seems like it's fine to lose one or two here and there. And we do have a bit of a move out over here, and it's being caught by the witness. So I'm not so sure that neblime immediately recognizes that. If he ends up queuing a Shaman or a Starpad, then maybe we'll be aware that he's trying to defend his base from being spied on all the time. But right now, he's just going to helpfully move his units across the map. And there's only the 3 Drakadins on the front gate. We did have an Ardent Authority coming with an Acantor, no less. There is an embassy, so you will probably see some drops. And going up to 4 gateways here for iSarCasm. Not interested in taking an additional base anytime soon. The witnesses are going to go ahead and start following the army movements. This one is just seeing what's going on. Now, in Cosmonic Brood War, when you have detection, you can see what's in the production queue and how far along is it. You basically get this UI here. So you'll get to see what your opponent is actively doing. The Matadors are starting to take some sustained fire, but they've already BTFO'd one of the Drakadins completely. The other one storms out to the stage, and the Acantor really needs to get over here. The first Matador has fallen. Now the immobilization here is going to be really good for the Acantors, and the focus fire is going to be necessary here for Neblime, but he's actually not paying attention to his army right now. He's busy back at home macroing. The Clerics have started to sustain some damage, and they will need to back off here. He's starting to micro his units again. The Pylon's kind of screwing up the auto-attack AI for the units, which is really, really quite useful in this particular context. However, you don't really want to overextend here if you're iSarCasm. I know that sounds silly because he's in his own base, but there's more Matadors coming. I think he's playing this quite well overall, despite not really likely seeing the Matadors before. He's going to go ahead and add a Warden over there. And yeah, the Acantor has just been really, really instrumental in riposting this push. At the same time, though, he had 4 gates. I feel like he would have been able to overwhelm the army. It's just a question of how cost-efficient would it have been. So far, the Acantor is sounding off. We have a Watchdog or 2 being added to the natural and the back base, I should say, and the natural itself is coming online. So we will be seeing that at some point, probably from both players getting up to that 3rd base. With no envoy, you can't really easily move across the map. The Architect is going to have a very fun time trying to escape that base, that Sim City. Very derpy unit, very large. I was postulating that I think I'll probably be able to reduce its durability a little bit once it's a little bit more responsive as a unit. And then it'll be a bit more vulnerable to things like, Wraiths dive bombing it or whatever in the early stages if you decide to try to rush it and you don't have a good escort, you don't have a good front line for it, you could say. Now, another thing that should be pointed out here as well is that all of the witnesses are giving iSarCasm a lot of mileage. He kind of knows where his opponent's army is. Adding a Stargate and a second Ardent Authority, I would definitely favor his position in a straight-up fight, and it doesn't look like Neblime is too interested in defending versus these witnesses. He's even going for Wraiths, which, you can use to try to, pick off Acantors, particularly if they're slowly walking across the map, but you pick them off very slowly between the 3 armor and all of the shields and HP that you got to burn through. So you need a decent amount of Wraiths to really do in numbers. Another thing I'm noticing a lot of Terran players do is they put an add-on structure, like a structure with an add-on, right at their ramp. And that can cause some serious problems. I'm not sure if Neblime has paid attention at this point, but, he's still not queuing up an Anciel. He doesn't have a Shaman for detection either. Like, his Wraiths are actually decloaking when they walk by the Witness, when they fly by the Witness on this rally point here. And that feels like it should be a bit of a clue. An Envoy is on the way, so it looks like we could see a pivot into drops. We actually don't have any anti-drop measures here. I say that, but obviously there is a Maverick infused anchor. A couple of shots coming out here. The Clerics can help to sustain the Goliaths. The Matadors aren't in a great spot, and even if they were, they can kind of be busted here, so it's a little bit awkward for neblime, but honestly, that Acantor is open for business. You know, it's actually currently having a bit of a faulty target, and yeah, can't really bust the ramp there. It was really, really out in the open. I wouldn't have been surprised if neblime just dove on it and cracked it. Now, the Architect is over here as well, but again, this is another unit which, actually, funnily enough, barely has more durability, it feels like, than the Acantors themselves. Now, in theory, it would have more because of the HP, but it just feels like because of its derpiness, because of its awkwardness with the way that it moves around and stuff, it just doesn't end up feeling particularly good. Well, there goes the Acantor inside the Envoy. Looks like he's going to elevator it up into this position. I don't necessarily hate this situation, but yeah, there we go. A Shaman has deployed and cast Vision onto the Witness. That's going to maybe instigate a bit of a move out here, as now he recognizes, hey, things are going pretty well for me. I actually have, you know, a cliff advantage over here, but that's where the Envoy comes in. It can start to whisk away that Acantor and put it back on the low ground. The Architect is also dishing out a ridiculous amount of damage to these high HP units. Matador is going into the anchor. Why not? And nothing here to actually repair it. There's a couple of Masons here, but there's actually the latest round of units was Shamans. I'm wondering where these Wraiths are in the meanwhile. Looks like they must have just all died, and GG has to be called. neblime getting cracked open like a can of tuna. Well, that was classic neblime play in that last match. Now it's cross spawns on a different side. We've got neblime as the Platinum Blue Terran in the top right, against iSarCasm as the Glacial Protoss in the bottom left. And yeah, in that last match, I feel like neblime has this thing where he definitely focuses quite a bit on trying to macro up, get up to a high base count. But he did actually build a lot more units than I would have that I expected here. And yeah, I was told to not cast these until after the tournament because there were some spoilers in this set. I'm assuming neblime will eventually reveal that that it goes through. Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, 3Co getting bopped here. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Keen, unfortunately, not able to find too much power, I would say. So he's expecting Mystery Meat to go through, and that makes sense. Yeah, Keen just didn't practice up, unfortunately. If it was ZVZ the whole way through, if random gave him Zerg every game, maybe then there would be a shot, but didn't end up happening, obviously. iSarCasm, I'm going to go ahead and scout the top left. As the discussion continues, we have a Fulcrum first this time around. No stockade nonsense. This might be actually when neblime decides to pick up a bunch of Terran units and just walk across the map with mech. Cross spawns makes it a little bit harder. You saw the pressure get diffused relatively easily, despite the fact that iSarCasm wasn't really building a lot of military units in that last game. And some of it was due to control, but also a lot of it was due to the Acantor. Let's be real. And now, a sip. This sip sponsored by the live chat. Starting to cast these games live. Shout out Diggity for the idea. Wasn't my idea, but he does it as live as well. And I feel like that's cool. People get to pop in, maybe see some games live that I'm casting, draw some interest that way. But also, I get to cast more games because, maybe these videos go live, maybe they become unlisted videos on the channel. Either way, they get logged for the casual ladder, start processing all those outstanding games, validating the replays, etc., etc. It's going to be a Vulture first. The Scribe is short-lived. But hey, it's not a scrapyard first. So there will be an opportunity here for neblime to get some map control, lay some lobotomy mines. Not lobster mines. They're not called lobster mines. The mind poison is sinking in. Beaver and Mess constantly saying it, as if it'll get me to change the name in-game. Never. Absolutely not. However, there's a Legionnaire coming as a follow-up. Now, Dracodons actually struggle versus Vultures, and it's not just because of the lobotomy mines. It's also just because Vultures are more nimble. They can deal pretty good upfront damage. We don't have the hard countery damage types in the game anymore. The Mason won't actually make it up the ramp, so he won't see that it's a triple gate. And the Legionnaire was also hidden, sort of reserved at this point. So it looks like it's going to be Legionnaire Dracodon, or maybe just straight up a Legionnaire Flood. There's a little bit of awkwardness as neblime desperately tries to scout up the ramp. That's not going to necessarily happen, and if he goes down the ramp, he's going to be ceding the cliff advantage once again as he starts to lay some mines. He only has the 2 vultures, however. He made the 3 and then started to expand, and with a Goliath in the backup. So, yeah, he's unfortunately right now kind of in the dark, and not just because of the recolor either. He's not really sure what his opponent has up his sleeve. He also doesn't technically see that, because the lobotomy mine borrowed vision range is actually quite small. So, unfortunately, there's not really an easy way to demonstrate that, but that was technically just out of range, just out of vision. Triple gate going pretty well here as iSarCasm takes the back base, seemingly dissuaded from doing anything else quite yet. And there's a pretty good proc of the lobotomy mine, but unfortunately the other one reveals itself. Oh, it actually gets the same set of Legionnaires again. So his army is being sort of split in 2. There's no follow-up just yet for neblime to actually take advantage of it. Hurakan, Matador, Goliath, kind of a scrap heap of an army. Just sort of taking a little of this, a little of that. We do, of course, have the mines themselves guarding the ramp. Hurakan is out now. Try to deal with the incoming Legionnaire spam. And here comes the deployment. It's just perfectly timed so that it can deal with the first 2 Legionnaires along with those mines. Now, if they were spaced out a little bit better, I feel like the first one would have popped and the second one would have popped after the fact, and they would have maybe stacked the... They would have reset the slow timer or the stun timer or whatever, at least on some of the units. But either way, that was a pretty solid sort of riposte. The question is whether or not the vultures are going to continue to be a choice for neblime. It looks like so. Adding a vestry as well from his stockade. He's got a pretty healthy worker count. At this point, he's 6 workers up, having expanded faster than his opponent. That's something that neblime likes to do, right? He likes to expand faster than his opponent, and he also really likes to get that worker count up there, and then maybe he can sustain a flood of units that overpowers something like what the Protoss have. This Legionnaire is watching. Pretty good play from iSarCasm to position his Legionnaire underneath the geyser just to see. He's got nice vision of the attempted ministry being built there. He can disrupt that if the army isn't there. And the vultures are going to fly on out, just like TVP in StarCraft 1. You get the vultures out there just to see what's going on. These ones don't have any mines left, so they can't really exert any additional map control. But with more Matadors, Hurakans, etc., starting to mass up, and some clerics starting to be trained out of that stockade, the vultures actually will be able to be healed, or repaired, and that will keep his HP pretty high. Now, this base is mostly being used for Vespene. We have the Embassy out, which is a fairly high gas sink, especially if you're building Witnesses, which cost 75 gas a pop. The Dracodons are on their way marching across, but the gateways are actually dark right now. iSarCasm floating a little bit of money. I'm going to have to start pumping out some additional units. It goes for 2 Zealots and holds the 3rd gate for now. Probably wants to go for another expansion if I'm getting any correct vibes here. And that's kind of similar to TVP and StarCraft 1 as well. You want to out-expand the Terran. Again, neblime now up by 10 workers. He's just very consistent with his macro. So the Hurakans are going to go ahead and thin the herd here. All the Legionnaires are taken care of. And that's actually most of the combat units that are currently available for iSarCasm. You can see some of his gateways blinking to life here. And he doesn't currently have any additional tech. He's saving up a lot of Vespene. Feels like maybe the Dracodons there are like a necessity, just to see if he can hold it. But obviously also the Witnesses are quite a heavy tax on his gas. He's going to go ahead and add a Warden or 2 to the high ground. And he can't yet really get out of his base safely, right? neblime can just walk up here and sort of soft contain his opponent. He doesn't have any Masons with this army, so it's not like he can start building anchors or watchdogs or anything of the sort. But he is waypointing additional units across. Looks like for now he's not going to try to expand to that natural pace. Instead, just helpfully, appreciating that situation that he's got with a 1 o'clock position. Unfortunately, this cliff advantage is really proving to be quite deleterious to him, and if the Wardens finish, it's only going to get worse. So maybe a slightly delayed engagement happening over here, but I feel like he's picked perhaps a reasonable time. The Matadors aren't really being healed right now because all of the clerics are busy healing the 1 Blackjack. Warden's being burned down by the Matadors' flame mode. Flame on, so to speak. There's more units sort of streaming in, but they're kind of out of sync. And some of these Matadors were also deployed, so they weren't actually fighting the Dracodons, but the clerics were keeping them alive the whole time. Not great focus fire out of iSarCasm. He still doesn't really have any tech. He floated a lot of money this game, and I think that might be his undoing, because not only does neblime have the worker advantage now, he also has a very decided advantage in terms of positioning on the map. And the tech here isn't really going to be too effective at dealing with the clerics. You can see this 1 cleric is just being healed by the other 3 clerics, more and more units streaming in. And with the pylons going down, there is no more military production for iSarCasm, and almost certainly he will have to GG out at this point. And there it is. Neblime strikes back, getting some mileage out of that. I feel like a lot of it was an inexplicable float from iSarCasm. Maybe he thought that like he just had a little bit more time to decide what to do. He's obviously a little bit of a newer player. So if things stretch away from Gateway, and in that case Ardent Authority, like in the first matchup, that might have been a situation where he was just like, oh, I don't really know what to spend my money on. I'm not even really sure what to build against this composition. And, you know, it's just, that might have been what he was doing. Or maybe he was thinking that he should take another expansion at some point, but didn't. And then it was too late because the witnesses came in. I don't know. Something that I like that he does. I like that he makes the witnesses, but I'm not 100% sure that they're super efficient, at least for rushing them up on just 2 bases. It feels like, you know, you want to be aware of what your opponent is going to do, but you want to be aware of that in a way that doesn't drain a lot of Vespene and kill a lot of your tempo. Because he wasn't really reinforcing his military count while he was saving money and spending money on the embassy and all the units that he made from it. I think he made at least 2 witnesses. That's 150 Vespene. That's a lot, right? And plus the embassy itself costs Vespene. So just keeping that in mind, something that he can maybe learn from. And hey, we've got a series. These 2 players are now 1-1. Let's see what happens next. Straight back into things, we have actually the same spawns as the last time, but iSarCasm is in the top right now as the Platinum Blue Protoss, and Neblime is in the bottom left as the Yellow Terran. I'm interested now in seeing if Neblime will continue to fashion out the Fulcrum firsts. You know, is he going to try to do his darndest to make mech work against Protoss? I think it's pretty likely, and it probably works better than Bio, although I have not yet casted all of the matches between the Shambler and Neblime that took place as practice matches before Ascension 5 Finals, where a lot of matches were played on Otherworld, like the old version of Otherworld, the one before the Otherworld looked like another world, and also, you know, it was a lot of Bio versus Protoss, if you remember. So I'm not 100% sure, you know, whether or not the Shambler just sort of farmed him in that sense. But that's absolutely something that I feel like, you know, Neblime discovered some strategies versus Protoss specifically using Bio. So he's going to go ahead and put his Fulcrum a little bit off to the right-hand side. That's not obviously where the ramp that goes out into the rest of the map goes. And I should also mention at this point, we've had 3 games on the same map where they're all been cross-spawn. You know, what does that mean for the state of play? Are we going to see more defensive play? Because normally, for those who are somehow unfamiliar, cross-spawn is more defensive because moving across the whole map tends to be like 5, 10, maybe 15 seconds longer for ground path distance, you know, ramp to ramp, so to speak, than moving from horizontal or vertical positions. Vertical is a little bit longer than horizontal usually, but generally speaking, you just look at it and you think, okay, well, if my opponent is next to me in one of the adjacent corners, then it's easier for me to get some units out there. And, you know, early game, that probably hurts Protoss the most versus Terran, because Terran have the opportunity to get more action out there. As the Fulcrum builder is going to complete his job. Job's finished. Jumps out and starts to scout. Rally point on the Vulture is going to the bottom right, and the Mason is heading top left. So that is going to mean that Neblime will scout his opponent last, but the Vulture will be over here to deal with the Scribe yet again. Kind of flashbacks here to what just happened in the last match between these 2 players. And another Vulture being queued up after the second one. So it looks like a 3 Vulture opening into an expansion is what Neblime wants to do. He's obviously stopped harvesting all Vespene after that first Fulcrum goes down. And the Gateway is going to conclude a Dracodon before starting up on a Legionnaire. So, funnily enough, our players are kind of focusing a lot of their attention on a similar build order either way. It's kind of neat. It's not something that I would necessarily suspect. This Vulture for Neblime obviously leaves the bottom right-hand corner empty-handed. Another one hits the middle. And this actually should mean that there could be an interesting timing here. Scrapyard only costs minerals. Stockade only costs minerals. Those being added there as Vespene is starting to be trickling in once again. The 2 Vultures arrive. This time around, they are not immediately taken apart by the by the units here. However, the focus fire wasn't exactly there, right? So it looks like at this point the Mason Scout is going to be dealt with. When you teleport, you actually dodge incoming projectiles, which is like kind of OP and not, believe it or not deliberately programmed in. But I'm fine leaving it in there. You know, when I say OP, I mostly just mean it's really good. But you need to time it well, and I'm not sure. I'm guessing that these guys are playing on like high or extra high latency, because otherwise, like, I don't know how you would even wrangle this connection from Ukraine, where iSarCasm is, to what do you call it? Australia, where Neblime is. At least I think that's where iSarCasm is. So yeah, Rogue Gallery coming in here for the aforementioned Igor. going for a interesting play. Now, I've seen people build rogue galleries, and, you know, it's a delight for me as the designer. They seem to go for, like, one of many units. You know, some of them will go Barghest for, like, a cheeky raid. Some of them will go for Charlatans for the hallucination damage multiplier. Some of them will obviously go for the, you know, playing out the Vagrants because they just are a nice ranged unit and they give you that flexibility to sustain in fights and like overwhelm your opponent as more of your units start to die because the Vagrant Shade mechanic. And then some of them go for Kabbalists for cheeky play, just like the Barghests. But also, Kabbalists could be straight up used in a head-on fight, I think. You know, they're going to go straight through things like Matadors where they have the high armor, especially when deployed. They only have 120 health. That's even when you factor in the armor. That's 5 shots from a Kabbalist just to kill it. So you add in the idea that you're going to be using Dracodons and stuff. You know, the one thing you can say about the Kabbalist mechanic is like, okay, well, they're going to charge in, and maybe they're just going to get torched by the Matador flamethrowers. But, you know, I think if you mix them in with some Legionnaires and stuff from the Gateway, you'll probably be okay. We are adding a second Gateway, but our production is not actually lighting up right now for iSarCasm. Just going to go ahead and saturate his expansion, start to build up his worker count. And obviously, neblime is actually not going to be at the maximum worker count right now. He's not in the lead in that respect. His units are kind of getting stalled out here by the one Kabbalist, which is kind of funny. So it's going to move across the map, and there actually aren't going to be that many units here to defend if it's just going to be the Kabbalist across the map there. A couple Dracodons charge on forward just to sort of slow down this attack and see if he can maybe stymie it a little bit. He actually doesn't have that much at home, though. Building another Kabbalist, this one is soon to arrive in the worker line. Looks like it was shift Q to attack move. And yeah, at this point, maybe neblime is going to bungle something as it starts to swipe away at him. 2 hits to kill a Mason. Actually identical to StarCraft 1, funnily enough. It looks like he might just get 1. No, he ends up darting out using the cloak teleportation mechanic, and even is able to sustain it. You hold position that bad boy, you might be okay. Now, back at home, Cleric was focused down, and it looks like maybe we lost a Matador in the process as well, but the Legionnaires are taken out, and the Dracodons fall on back. Now, there's 5 of them here, so I don't actually think this is going to be enough to break this, and he hasn't even targeted the worker line over here, where it feels like he absolutely could do some damage there. And you can see, you can't really sustain past the shots of the Kabbalist, so it's doing a very, very good job of dealing with that. At this point, the Matadors are kind of wasting their DPS attacking, you know, the Nexus and stuff. And the one thing you can say is that during this time, I do feel like maybe iSarCasm could have, like, walked over here and started attacking the scrapyard or something. Right now, obviously, there's too many defenses over here. The lodestone is a detector, so it's going to go ahead and scan out that locally, make sure that you don't die to that sort of situation. Matadors are retreating across the map. But yeah, I would have liked to see... You just want to add more things for your opponent to deal with in the middle of a fight. Like, oh, okay, he probably reinforced that base. I don't even necessarily need to look at it. I'm just going to walk over here and start attacking his production. I know it might sound silly, or maybe I can guard this area so the Ministry can't go down until he clears me out. Like, something like that. Just getting more value out of the Kabbalist while it's there, and then splitting his attention so that maybe you sustain less losses, you kick him out, you destroy his army without even losing the single scribe, for example. But at the same time, iSarCasm did do pretty well as far as cost efficiency goes. He only lost, like, the 2 Kabbalists and the 2 Legionnaires, I think. Maybe 1 Dracodon died at some point. But either way, it was fairly solid there. And doesn't seem like he is the one bit, you know, confused at all about what to do now. He's adding double Ardent Authority. He can go for Cantors or Architects. He can start to break down this situation. And neblime is only now finishing his Ministry. So he's going to go ahead and fully saturate, or partially saturate anyway, the Geyser. He is going to go ahead and add Starpad. So he's not interested in saving resources for Tier 2. He wants to go in for some drops, or he wants to go in for, you know, some mass wraiths or something. He definitely needs to see what his opponent is dealing with, who is only now putting down the embassy. It feels like maybe iSarCasm kind of recognized at some point, that's funny, that, you know, hey, it's working out pretty well for me if I delay my embassy. I spent a lot of Vespi and a lot of resources on the embassy beforehand, and I didn't really, you know, use my money to the highest amount that I could have. So maybe I delay the embassy this time around. I get that, you know, 3rd base up afterwards, and he's still floating a little bit of money here, but it's clear he wants to take another Nexus, or at least I think that's what's happening over here. He's adding a pylon first, and then he'll spend most of his minerals across that map. Another lodestone coming, a 3rd Starpad coming. This feels like, because his opponent has gone for a more macro-oriented approach and isn't actually gunning for a lot of units, you know, at this point it's clear it's going to be in a Cantor drop, as the Envoy is coming out of that embassy. I feel like Neblime could have actually sustained into a tier 2 position and just sort of like hunkered down and tried to go up to 3 bases, right? This map kind of affords that level of play, but he feels like maybe he's forced into the mass Wraith situation, which it can work even after all of the changes to the Wraith, and a lot of them were indeed nerfs. You can absolutely go for triple star pad Wraith and overwhelm your opponent with that, although obviously it's less effective versus the Dracodons now that the armor, the attack count changes in where it attacks twice instead of once, so it gets double reduced by armor. The Acantor is on the way, and honestly the Envoys will be, zoned away, I think, quite a bit. The Lodestone is in here with 2 Mavericks. That's just really all it's going to be doing is dissuading the Acantor from, maybe like focusing some of its attention, having iSarCasm need to focus click and specifically order the Acantor to attack things. So he's adding an engram in his main, which could actually be fortuitous versus the Wraith spam that we know is coming. I'm wondering where, okay, the Wraiths are actually idling over here by the 3rd, and the front gate is being taken care of. This Envoy in the bottom right hasn't actually moved out yet, adding an engram to the natural. A little bit far away, you can still kind of hover right over here with a bunch of Wraiths and kill things. By the way, I don't know what happened there. And the other thing that I'm looking at here is that the 3rd is not really being saturated right now. However, it will soon be under attack by all the Wraiths. At the same time, this is when, he's going to have to scramble to defend his 3rd, I feel like, because the Envoy was about to move in there. So we have a Warden and another engram and another Warden being added, but this is just at the same time as the Wraiths arrive. So this is going to start sowing some chaos. The engram will, of course, have to be canceled here. And it looks like it will be at close to the last second. He doesn't manage to get the Warden. He's going to cancel that one. His Dracodons and Positrons are starting to fly across. They obviously deal a decent amount of splash damage, and Neblime right-clicked the minimap or something and absolutely lost all of his Wraiths. Well, now's a good time for the Acantor to strike, considering there's not really any Wraiths that can, riposte against it. But the 3rd base did get a little bit delayed. One worker died, Warden was destroyed, and yeah, you can see here the Acantor busy targeting the Lodestone, so it's going to take a few more shots to kill the Mavericks then, or the Masons rather. A little bit of an attempted focus fire there. Here come the Wraiths. And yeah, with the help from that Watchdog, they are actually going to be more than capable of dealing with that. So it looks like maybe 2 Masons died. You do want to get more mileage out of the Acantor drop if you can. Kind of similar to how in PvT, in StarCraft 1, your Reaver is really quite an investment. I would say it's kind of similar here. Now, the problem is iSarCasm is floating an absolutely ungodly amount of money. I really highly doubt that he's concerned about losing the Acantor and doing so rather cost inefficiently. He managed to stop some mining time, but the structures are being repaired, and yeah, it's just going to mean that more Watchdogs are coming. I was looking around for the Atlas, and it is about 25% done, but at this point I think iSarCasm is saving up for a Monument of Sin. He is more than happy to have around 1,000 of each resource, which is required for that. Adding a second engram over to the 3rd, the Wraiths will reveal that, and oh, it's actually not going to be a Monument of Sin. He queues up some Architects instead. So it looks like he's going to hang out within Ancestral Archives instead. That's going to afford him some very, very powerful ground units. Wraiths reveal by Positrons and Engrams. Yeah, okay, see you later, dude. I'm not touching that. That's when you hear the I am invincible line, because the Wraith says that before just getting absolutely melted. That being said, the Kabbalist is still watching the front gates. This is actually really good for iSarCasm because he knows there hasn't been a ground move out. And maybe there's been a mass transport or something like that, but that's the only thing that could possibly catch him off guard. He made the embassy, but he's been using it for worker production, and he's actually still ahead of Neblime in that respect. This 3rd base was massively delayed. Neblime really wanted to go for the Starpad play, but it was at a point where we already kind of knew iSarCasm was a little bit, defended against that. And he's massing up the Architects, the Dracodons. We're going to need to see Sentinels on these ramps or on this high ground elevation so that he can make sure not to die to that situation. Obviously, the fact is that the Architects are in a pretty good spot for that. So I would absolutely expect, with the engram, the second engram coming and the Positron idling over here, I really don't think that the Wraiths are going to be able to do too much. This is kind of like an equipment check from Neblime. Do you have, splash damage? Do you have anything over here that I can abuse? If not, then maybe I can come in and tickle you. He uses the Wraiths to spot out. Okay, there's Architects, there's Dracodons. His opponent is none the wiser. And he actually almost flew some Wraiths over the Kabbalist, and he does. And one of them gets decloaked. Hey, that's weird. Why did that happen? One of the shamans is actually deployed, so he'll be able to see the Kabbalist if it ends up drawing any closer. Here comes the move out here from iSarCasm. He's not left behind too much for defense, only the one positron. He's relying on his engrams otherwise, adding some engrams to the front as well. An engram, a redundancy pylon, and a warden. The Wraiths could maybe dive in here and actually cause some problems if they spot that there's no military. There's 2 Drakodons, but this number of Wraiths can absolutely deal with that. Just seeing what can I slice in here and deal with. Well, there's a Patriarch, and 15 Wraiths just attacked it, and it has 4 armor, so they did fucking nothing. Yeah, that will absolutely not cause too many headaches for iSarCasm. He is massing up quite the front. The Kabbalist does get charged in and dies. That might indicate to neblime that there's going to be an attack coming, and he only has the 2 Sentinels. He does have Goliaths and Anchors, but I feel like this is going to be way too much, especially with the Architects trying to zoom on in. Positrons are kind of frontlining, which is not really where they need to be. And if the Positrons go down, then the Wraiths can actually get a lot of mileage out. The first Sentinel has already fallen. The Anchors will no doubt be next. And we're waiting for the Wraiths. They're being healed up. And the Positrons are kind of being focused down, right? There's only the one left. And I think that could also be focused down as well. The double Cataphract is here. And now the Wraiths can spring into action because there is indeed no crowd control. I say that the Patriarch arrives, but it'll just end up getting totally bopped as well. Not by the Wraiths, admittedly, but in general. Well, that was a very expensive loss of military. He does end up clearing out some of the mech and a decent number of the tier 1 units that neblime had, but he's going to be more than happy to replace them with more Matadors on the front, and he does have the 3 Mantles pumping out Cataphracts right now, which range-wise are going to be really effective, and more Sentinels were created in the meantime during that fight, which is good heads-up play from neblime. That is going to stop iSarCasm from being able to easily close this game out. He has an Argosy at Prostration stage. He's kind of just exploring the tech tree. It might be some of the first times he's actually seen those. But also, I've noticed that he's one of the players that has the game detection enabled for CMBW, and so he actually just flat out shows you when he's playing the game. And I don't know, man. I see that guy playing the game pretty much all the time. 3,000 minerals, though. He can spend an awful lot of money. Goes down to 2k just from a couple of production cycles, adding a Mind Tyrant and a Didact to the equation and taking the 12 o'clock position, which will be scouted out by the Wraith Swarm, which is still 13 strong. We've got a lot of Matadors in Trojans here. It looks like he's going to load them up while they're deployed. So that's kind of interesting. He's trying to isolate the ones that actually have something in them. You know, you can fit Cataphracts in there too, but I don't know if he wants to load all of those in. And the other problem is, where do you even drop these, right? Like, the Wraiths actually don't end up confirming 12 o'clock. They could absolutely force a cancel or force an army move out and then, you know, weaken the front as a result. That's absolutely something that neblime would want to do. He could try to consolidate all of his forces as well, but I'm not so sure that it would work out too well. Wraiths and Trojans going to be maybe accompanying things. I could maybe see the Wraiths body blocking for the engram shots and then the Trojans unload on top of them. Absolutely could be the case. The one downside of loading in transformed Matadors as opposed to loading in anything else... Oh, here comes the Kabbalist. Absolute tickling. Destroyed. Utterly annihilated. All right, something was over there. I guess I'll go ahead and attack move with some of my units. Or maybe just delay it. Maybe I build the Ministry here and then lift it off there. So yeah, he's going to start to think about how can I do things over here? What's going on over here? He should have noticed the Didact. He should have noticed that the other units were cloaked. And so, yeah, he's going to go ahead and fly off to this location. But the engrams are about to finish. Certainly, the Wardens are already done. And it looks like instead he's going to go ahead and go for a drop on top of the army. This isn't too bad. I mean, the Mind Tyrant is kind of, you know, moved out to a different location. It's not really being used right now. An Archon has been made. And there goes the deployment there. The Didact trying to keep things alive. There's a stasis cast on some pretty important units in the Cataphracts, but there's more where that came from. The Mind Tyrant's still not being used right now, but it's also not being revealed because it isn't casting any abilities. It looks like the Didact went nuts and immediately got bopped. There's still an awful lot of units over here, but the Pariah is sustaining through so much of this thanks to the Patriarch. And that alone is going to be enough to, I think, mop this force up. Some Hurricanes have arrived. Ahmed charges into battle fiercely, trying to support the mech units, but I don't know if it's going to be enough. This battle looks like it's been won by the Protoss. Is it going to be enough to completely wipe off neblime from the face of the earth? I don't know if that's going to be the case. He does keep 4 of his Trojans alive. He doesn't have any Shamans to repair them right now. And he's actually a little bit lax on... This is funny. He's a little bit lax on the... Sentinel count, right? He's actually floated some of his structures over, is increasing the surface area with which iSarCasm has to attack into him. And the Argosy has now been turned loose to make a Solarian. There's going to be a Didact follow-up, a whole host of idle workers here. neblime now stretching ahead in the worker count, effective and real. Effective and actual, I guess you would say. Ministry now floating over for a 4th base. It looks like our players will be on even footing as far as expansions go. Oh, never mind. There's a lot of idle workers everywhere. I'm not seeing any gas caps for iSarCasm. Obviously, on the release patch, they do cost Vespine. That's changed now. They cost 400 minerals on pre-release. Might be a little bit too easy, actually, for the benefit that they offer, but we will find out over time. And I think as well as all of that, we are going to see, some reservoirs out for Neblime. He's capped just the natural right now, adding... okay, he's got a rotary and he's got a commandment. He's adding a 4th starport. He's got the star pad still on a hotkey control group. And the Didact is once again starting to cloak things up. What's next? Another Solarian. The prostration stage. It seems like it was an experiment. Oh yeah, the Pariah worked out pretty well. I'll build more of those. Queuing up a Mine Tyrant after the fact. Very low on Vespine here for iSarCasm. Not so low on minerals. Can definitely get a lot more mileage. Maybe he drops some Grand Libraries over here or something. Just for the purpose of spending some of his minerals a little bit more efficiently. It looked like he was going to do something with that scribe, but then he was like, wait, hold on, let me check 12 o'clock again. Kabbalah's patrolling the top left. Nobody's taken another main yet. This is settling into for a really long macro game, which is something we don't see too often. But, Neblime's the player to do it, and this is the map to do it on. Ramsey is going to go ahead and attack move ahead. I really like this play from Neblime. It's subtle, but moving a unit over here is just going to basically catch any ground units along this path. Now, it's a little bit different now because they ended up linking up. But there goes the defensive matrix. It's going to be a Matador Ramses drop. And what can we do with this? He reveals that there is indeed another base. Here's the unload. And the Azazel, unfortunately, is sort of just in the middle of everything. Some of the units did not actually unload. D-Matrix onto the Ramses. None of the Matadors are actually attacking the turret. That could have been more graceful from Neblime. I like the idea, and it does force out some movements. He does end up killing a couple of scribes, mostly the ones that were harvesting Vespine, and he kills a single warden. Okay, that's a thing. A single Solarian attack is going to happen in the bottom. Hey, that could provoke a pretty stark response. There's still so many idle Masons all over the place. But, when you got 129 of them, does it really matter? There was a landing structure here. Here's the one Solarian attack. I mean, I guess he's thinking, I have Didact, so I can just recall it back. I don't know if that would be super efficient, but it is a thing. And the problem is there are Goliaths in the anchors that are slowly but surely dismantling the steward count. More and more Protoss are funneling down over here. We have Ramses and Cataphracts here to deal with the rest of the stewards. This has been a pretty good massacre of the number of workers. I think it said 18, 19 kills on that Solarian at this point. And here are some Sundogs. They remain cloaked until they get close enough. And yeah, that's going to be it for the Solarian. But hey, the real attack force is coming in the middle of the map. What's the response? Oh my god, scramble. Get everybody involved. Matadors are deploying. Shamans are deploying to try to heal. Most units are on a move command for some reason and sort of just clumping up. And the Sundogs are going to need to start focus firing. There is a healthy number of... You can see the positron count is quite high, and they're focusing down some of those stacked air units. That is a pretty steep loss, and he even loses the Seraph, so the armor end is not going to be there for very long. You can see it's expiring over there on the other side. The Archon holding back so many mech units at the same time, and no real defensives in the main. He was really counting on this ramp being held, but like I mentioned earlier, he moved a bunch of his Sentinels over here, and he never actually replaced them after he moved them over to 6 o'clock. Trojans are empty. Maybe trying to move around across the different areas. The Azazel has 8 HP and is not going to get focused down. Oh, a Positron manages to snipe it. And that, my friends, might actually be the closer here. He's going to get directly on top. He still has the Didact. He can recall his rally point, which only has Zealots right now. So that's a little bit unfortunate. But I don't really see how Neblime can get anything done when everybody is on top of his production. And after 22 minutes, iSarCasm will take the lead in the set. And we got more to cast in this particular set, so check back later, because of course, we'll be back with more of those games. We still have, I think, 4 or 5 of them. So yeah, pretty good stuff. Pretty cool stuff to see. iSarCasm bursting onto the scene. Some will say he's playing the easiest race, but I think his fundamentals are sound. Until next time.